My name is J.D. Bradley, and I've had a hell of a life that's given me a unique perspective and crazy stories that I share here. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to my first history podcast. This is going to be a series of random historical tidbits that I find interesting, and you probably will too. I'm not going to try to quantify them. If you don't believe me, please look into it. As a matter of fact, if you do believe me on these, please look into it. Don't ever take anybody's word for anything. Do your own research. And here we go, in chronological order. 90% of the Native Americans in this country that were wiped out died from diseases they're exposed to by the Europeans they didn't have any resistance to. Everyone is aware that the Native Americans were the recipients of a great deal of injustice, although most people are unaware of the extent of the suffering inflicted upon them. That being said, however, it is estimated that 90% of the native populace in what was now the United States of America died from diseases of European origin that they had no immunity to, and that was coincidental and unintended, other than the next historical fact I'm about to cover. Now consider the difficulty that the white man had in corralling/massacring, etc. the population that was left. Had not so many died from disease, it is highly unlikely the USA now. The numbers would have been insurmountable. Jeffrey Amherst, that the prestigious college is named after, is the first person known to use germ warfare. He's the man that gave the smallpox-infected blankets to natives that lots of people know about, but few people know it was him. The Barbary slave trade. White Europeans were kidnapped and enslaved by Africans for around 200 years. At the peak of slavery in the United States of America, less than 2% of Caucasians owned slaves. Now factor in later immigration of white people like the Italians, that means the overwhelming number of white people in this country do not have ancestors that own slaves, and ergo have no responsibility for slavery, nor do their ancestors, of course. The concept of reparations is a farce for a number of reasons, such as the Irish slaves coming up, also because the country that fought to secede and keep slavery was abolished at the end of the Civil War. The current government would not be at all culpable and lost approximately 600,000 troops, and that's more than payment enough. There were also black slave owners in this country during that era. For over 200 years, the Irish were enslaved right alongside the Africans of this country. I'll be fine with no reparations. That was my ancestors, not me. The Irish Holocaust, i.e. the potato famine, was not caused because of a failed crop, but rather the British stealing their food. It was a deliberate and effective attempt at genocide. Lincoln was a racist, and the Civil War was not about slavery. The South was being economically raped by the North and said, fuck this, and seceded. The North was dependent on continuing that rape. The Russian intervention of 1863. When France and Britain considered intervening in our Civil War, the Russians sent a fleet of ships on both coasts for 7 months, which deterred their intervention and stopped raids by Southern ships on important ports. The Coming Money Trust cartoon of 1912. You'll have to look this one up. Drawn by Alfred Owen Crozier in 1912 to warn of the impending danger of the upcoming so-called Federal Reserve System, and of course neither federal nor reserve, the same one that parasitically sucks the life out of our economy today. It's interesting to note that every time in our history this system has been implemented, there have been those aware of the implications, yet the majority of the populace today is absolutely unaware of the pyramid scheme that is our banking system. It is very fortunate that more and more people are exposed to the truth every day. It's also very telling that the free exchange of information through the internet is currently being attacked. I'd say Google it, but never use Google. Start page it or DuckDuckGo it. An interesting Woodrow Wilson quote from 1916. Some of the biggest men in the United States in the field of commerce and manufacture are afraid of somebody, are afraid of something. They know there's a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, they better not speak above their breath in condemnation of it. The Balfour Agreement, November 1917. It agreed to give Palestine to the Jews in exchange for influencing the Americans into joining World War II. Ergo, the future invasion of Palestine to establish Israel had nothing to do with the so-called Holocaust. Royal Raymond Rife cured every disease known to man in the early 1930s. The Hvar Agreement of 1933, the Nazis and the Zionists worked together hand in hand to transport and settle Jewish people to Palestine from Germany. Operation Underworld. The United States government first started working with the mafia during World War II. King David Hotel. The bombing of the King David Hotel was done by the Jewish terrorist organization Irgun. The head of the bombing was Benjamin Emanuel, father of Barack Obama's White House Chief of Staff, Rahm Emanuel, and later mayor of Chicago. The head of Irgun was Menachem Begin, who later became Prime Minister of Israel from 1977 to 1983. Begin once bragged that he brought terrorism to the world. Zionism is terrorism. In 2001, Zionists did 9/11. The Nakba, 1948. Nakba, which means catastrophe. Over 700,000 Palestinians were forcibly removed from their homes to make room for the new Jewish settlers. This is the beginning of all the tension in the area and continues to this day. Operation Mockingbird in the 1950s. The CIA infiltrated the mass media to control the minds of the populace and sure never stopped. Operation Ajax, 1953. The CIA orchestrated a coup against a democratically elected ruler in Iran and installed a puppet government to the Western oil companies. Gee, why would they hate us? Ted Kaczynski, aka the Unabomber, was a victim of the CIA brainwashing experiment, and this was covered in an Atlantic article, and that happened in 1958-ish. John F. Kennedy did LSD on a regular basis while in the White House with his former high school girlfriend, Mary Pinochet Meyer. JFK also shared a mistress with mobster Sam Giancana. The Diary of Anne Frank is a proven fraud. George H.W. Bush is the only known person in the world that claims to have not known where he was when he found out that Kennedy had been killed. Jim Morrison, the lead singer of The Doors, his father was the admiral in charge of the Gulf of Tonkin incident that started the Vietnam conflict. He always alleged his parents were dead. And the reason he would do that clearly is because he would be extremely hated if everybody knew the truth. In the early morning of June 8, 1967, Israel bombed the USS Liberty in the hopes of sinking it and blaming Egypt, killing 34 American sailors and injuring 171. LBJ helped cover that up. COINTELPRO was a program that the FBI had in the 1960s in which they would infiltrate activist groups and talk them into committing crimes so they could lock them up in prison. It actually got discovered because some of the hippies infiltrated the FBI and proved it. Jonestown, 1978. Everybody knows about the Guyana tragedy, but what most people don't know is that Jim Jones had serious connections to the CIA, and most likely was an extension of MK Ultra, which went underground at that point. If you don't know what MK Ultra is, look it up. MK-Ultra. Mormons, their official doctrine until 1978 was that all black people were descendants of Cain, and their skin color was the mark of Cain. Pretty fucking racist, huh? John Hinckley, the man that shot Reagan, his family were both personally and professionally very close to the Bush family. The CIA was responsible for the crack cocaine epidemic in the 1980s, which was covered in the San Jose Mercury News. The author, or the investigator that wrote that, later turned into a book called Dark Alliance and was doing further investigations when he shot himself in the back of the head 3 times with a revolver. Imagine that. Osama bin Laden was a CIA asset. Also, it was reported in multiple agencies that he died in 2001 of kidney failure. If he'd actually been killed during the Obama bullshit, they wouldn't have thrown him in the ocean. They'd have paraded his body around the world showing it off. But that was just a bullshit cover-up story because he was the boogeyman to scare people into doing what they want, accepting tyranny. The family of Martin Luther King sued the USA for his assassination and won in 1999. The Dancing Israelis of 2001. After the first plane hit the Twin Towers, there were a number of Middle Eastern-looking men standing on top of a van, and on the side of the van had a painted picture of airplanes flying into the World Trade Center, clapping and cheering as the second one hit. This woman called the cops because it was clearly very suspicious. The cops picked them up, they released the FBI, and were subsequently let go by the FBI to go back to Israel. As it turns out, they were Mossad agents. If you know what the Mossad is, that's the Israeli version of our CIA. Imagine that. So at the very, very minimum, Israel knew 9/11 was going to happen and let it happen. Eve Howard Hunt, who was one of the Watergate burglars that went to prison for Nixon, had a deathbed confession in 2001 that he was involved in the assassination of JFK. And that's it for today. I'm kind of curious what people are thinking. You can always get a hold of me at jdbradleyauthor.com. If you enjoyed this or any of my episodes, please share with your friends and help me build an audience. I have books available on Amazon, JD Bradley, and you have a great day. Bye-bye.